Here comes another one. Here comes another one. Here comes another episode of the brain of my brain of my brain. I swear, I make these things for myself. So, leading off of episode 3, where I talked about using the neural pathway that already exists within every single human, from learning their first language, acquiring spoken competence in their first language, using that path as much as possible when helping adults learn a second language. Providing a way for adults to follow that if they follow this way, it's designed so that that path that already exists in their mind will be used as much as possible. Resources from that path will be used as much as possible, thus making the process of learning to speak a language not as unnatural. Yeah, unnatural. That's a good word. I should be using that word more often because it is. Using any other path, in other words, forcing the brain to create neural pathways from scratch to speak a language is unnatural because the brain already has a path which it developed naturally. So use it. Okay. To do this, here's the logic that I'm following. If I can map out, if I can break down the process that a human goes through from conception to, for all intents and purposes, fluency in speaking its first language. If I can break down this process into enough stages, I should be able to define why these stages are important in terms that can be generalized to a wider audience that is not just those babies but adults too. By then defining these terms in this generalized way to adults, I can then create a similar process, but that is catered to adults. So the first step was to break the natural process that we observe as adults, we observe babies going through, break that down into the necessary stages. I didn't really have a criteria with which to use in defining these stages. I didn't really have a criteria per se. This is what has been defined by me in the literature that I read and what makes sense. So I have broken the process of language one learning their native language down into six stages. I call them 6 stages of relationship that we have with language. Of course, at any moment, I will amend by adding a stage or combining or whatever, depending upon comments or info from concerned individuals or from what I read later on. But for the moment, I have 6 stages. The first stage, I call it the prosodic relationship with language. Prosody, I think that's how you say that word. I've never heard this word before until this research I've done, but I guess it refers to the non-verbal aspect of language, the melody, the intonation. And I think it starts within the womb until birth. That's my thing. But I'm going to say within the womb until about 3 to 5 months old. Okay? A baby, a human has a prosodic relationship with language. In other words, the human is getting very familiar with only the melody, the intonation, the stress of a language. The next stage, which I'm going to give dates, you know, like ages, months, years, from when to when this occurs. Completely arbitrary for the purpose of this. It's just so you can kind of like envision. Okay, so this is what's happening. I can envision a baby in a womb and a baby at 35 months years old. Just to that. For purpose of this, it's not important when it actually happens. The only important thing is that it happens in this process, in these stages. So the first one is the prosodic relationship. The second one is what I call the universal allophonic relationship. Allophonic coming from allophone, allophone being one of the various sounds a phoneme can take, but basically sound. The universal sound relationship we have with the individual sounds of language. Now, universal. At this stage happens when our speech production system is working, when it is in gear to work. So from womb to about 3 to 5 months, babies are physically incapable of making any of the sounds of human language. Because I think the larynx is up here restricting the tongue from moving. And the tongue is what we use, is the main thing we use to restrict air, which then allows us to make all those consonant and vowel sounds that make up language. So from birth until about 3 to 5 months, babies can't even do it. So they're forced to just get intimately involved with the prosody and just in analyzing and internalizing the various sounds. And they can't produce anything. Then suddenly at 3 to 5 months, the larynx goes down, and the tongue is now free to just move around. And they start, and as soon as that happens, they start playing with it like anyone would when they get a new toy. They just start playing with their tongue and moving it around their mouth and making all these different sounds. And of course, they're going to start, the first thing they're going to try to do is imitate their environment, and they're going to imitate what they understand, what they have analyzed, and they've analyzed because they've had from within the womb to 5 months. So at some point, I'm not going to say I don't know what within the womb. I'm just going to say about 10 months. So 5 months in the womb, 5 months out. They've had almost a year of just listening to all these sounds. And so they're going to, as soon as they're able to, they're going to start trying to make them. And the first sounds that they make at this stage, which lasts between, at the second stage, which lasts between 3 to 5 to 7 to 8 months. So I would say about 3 to 4 months long. The first sounds that they make are sounds that are universally understood, universally used by every language in the world. Universally shared sounds. This is all. The only reason why I can say this is because I read it. So I'm just trusting the data that I read. Why they're doing this? Okay, so that's the first one. Then the third, after I explain the stages, then I'm gonna, if it's not too long, I'm gonna try to explain why it's important. That's a really important thing to do because it'll help me generalize it to adults. Then the third one, at around 7 to 8 months to about a year, they go into the third stage, which I call the local allophonic relationship, the local sounds, where they start producing sounds that are unique to the location where they're born, so the geographically local place where they're born, whether it be a country or it's not even a country though. It's smaller than a country. That's why people in southern and northern parts of countries often speak differently. People depending on the size of the country, people in western, eastern parts of countries often speak different. In the middle speak different. It's just local. It's very, very local. So the sounds that are unique to that local region. So the third stage is that. Then they hit the fourth stage, which is when they start producing. They start, not only they become really comfortable with producing the being comfortable with the universal and then the local sounds that make up human language. They start mixing them to produce words. And from 1 year to about a year and a half, they start just uttering tons of one-word sentences. And across the entire world, the sounds that the things that babies start saying are always the same. During this period, half of the words that they say are objects. Then the remaining are like actions, motions, routines, and something called listemes that I'm not going to try to explain right now. It's all the same. Doesn't matter what country, they all start saying the same things. They'll start identifying the same things. And then at about a year and a half to 2, in between, of course, all these dates vary because every single human varies. So, but generally speaking, about a year and a half to 2 years in between there, they transition from their one-word utterance relationship with language to a 2 to 3 word utterance relationship with language, where they start combining all these words that they're learning during that stage, during the previous stage. They start understanding the grammar. They start using language in what adults perceive as in grammatical ways. Then the last stage, so from about a year and a half to about, I forgot what I said there. So 4 stages, the one word relationship with language is from about a year to a year and a half, and then the 2 to 3 word relationship with language is about a year and a half to 2.5, and then to 2 to 2.5, and then from about 2 years, 2.5 years to 3.5 years in between there, they transition from the 2 to 3 word relationship with language to what, for all intents and purposes, fluency, where they're just saying complete long sentences that are grammatically accurate, and they are now, wherever they are locally, citizens of that location as a baby citizens of that location. These are the stages. Why are these important? How are these important? How can I generalize them to be applicable to adults? Well, stage 1, why do they learn the prosody of a language first? I think the prosody of a language is how all non-verbal communication occurs. That's how we express emotion with language. We have many different words to express emotion, but to paint emotion, but to actually communicate it, I think the prosody is what we use to communicate it. So the stress, there's a particular type of stress intonation. There's so many words, I don't know how to use them yet. All I know is there's a particular flow to language that denotes, that communicates non-verbally, anger, sadness, confusion, fear, all this stuff. So wipe all the words out. Just have a wavy, like music, something that communicates to something beneath our conscious mind, our subconscious. Wipe all that out, and you have the emotion of language. And since that is the most important, that is why we speak, to communicate emotions, to connect with people, to get this stuff out so that other people can understand, and so we can help each other and we can improve and solve problems. I mean, emotional health is like the new form of evolution, or a new form of new form of selection for humans. Like we die if we aren't emotionally healthy, right? Whether it be through suicide or we physically die, just our body shuts down. So emotional health is huge, language is the key tool we use to communicate it. So of course the most important thing would be to understand that aspect first, and we do that. We're forced to do that. A baby within the womb can't hear anything else but the prosody of a language. And as soon as the baby comes out of the womb, it can start hearing the unique sounds, and now it just kind of, so now that it has the prosody just ingrained in its subconscious animal mind, where it's just it forms the base of its entire identity. It comes out of the womb, and then it starts focusing on the sounds, but still can't speak anything. So I would say this is developing a solid relationship with the prosody of a language is what allows an individual to say things like, this sounds right, and this doesn't sound right when they're speaking, when they're listening and speaking a language. This feels right. You can basically replace the word sound with feels. Clearly that's very important. That's why it's the first thing we do. Second thing is producing. So we spend a year just absorbing in silence language, analyzing it in silence. Then about a year, 10 months, we are producing it. But how are we producing it? In this first stage, we're just playing with our mouth, playing with this tool like it's a toy. And depending on how the reaction we get from our environment, we know we're getting close to sounding out the individual phonetic nature of this regionally defined language. We know we're getting close to it by how accurate, how our environment reacts. This is what adults refer to as babbling. When a baby's babbling, baby's playing with their mouth and trying and figuring out how to mimic these sounds, which is the baby's reality. The baby doesn't have any idea of words or meaning or anything at this point. It's just language to a baby at this point is just blurbs of sound, and it just needs, and it has enough experience with it that it can recognize each individual one, first at a universal level, and then in stage 3 at the local level, and it just imitates it, and it knows it's doing a good job when the adults are like, "Oh, look how cute it is! It sounds kind of like us. It's like going goo, and it's going ga, and it's do dee and da dee, and all these things." And the baby think about being a baby. Baby, it finally has this toy it can play with, right? So it just starts. The first thing it does is just try to imitate its environment, and it's like playing with its mouth, like its tongue. It's like just moving it around. And then it's restricting it in weird ways, and then suddenly it starts creeping towards a sound that its environment is familiar with, right? So it's like goo, and then the environment's like, "Ooh, he just said goo." So baby reacts to that. It's like, "Oh, the environment changed because I said I had my tongue in this position, and I restricted the air in this way, and with this much force, and my mouth was in this shape. So I'm gonna just stay in this position and just keep repeating this." So it goes goo 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 goo, and the environment's like, "Oh my god, he's so cute, he's saying goo 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 all the time. What an adorable thing." And the baby's happy as hell because it's like connecting with the environment for not the very first time, obviously, but in a very powerful way. So it just keeps doing that. Does that with every single sound that first universal language has, and then does that with every sound that the local language has. That type of relationship is really key in how the baby can know that it's doing it correctly. So obviously that's really important for an adult to do too. That along with the prosody thing is really important because the adult already has this neural pathway in his or her mind that is the prosody and the local sounds of its native language. So what it needs to do to carve out the new pathways, it needs to be able to differentiate between the prosody of its native language and the prosody of the target language that it's learning. And then it needs to do that with the local sounds. So it needs to be able to differentiate between the prosody of the by differentiating, by starting at this basic level, it's starting from the beginning, and then it's only deviating from this original neural pathway when necessary, not when it's unnecessary. So it seems from this point, it seems necessary to deviate to recognize. In the process of recognizing the prosody of the target language, it deviates a little bit. In the process of recognizing and then being able to produce the sounds that are unique to the target language, it deviates a little bit. But other than that, it stays in the same neural pathway. Theoretically, I think. And it's kind of like this throughout the entire thing. It goes from the local sounds, and then it starts combining these words to produce the words that are local, that are understood by this target language, and then it starts playing with the grammar, so that's understood by this target language. So there's still a lot of work that I need to do, but this process, these 6 stages, getting familiar first with the emotional aspect of how this target language communicates its emotion non-verbally, getting familiar with that first, then getting familiar with the sounds, then getting familiar with combining those sounds into words, then getting familiar with combining those words into sentences. Following this path should allow for this adult to use as much as possible the neural pathway that already exists, deviating only when necessary, thus facilitating a much easier transition into speaking in the target language. The one thing that's interesting here is the prosody of a language is unique for each language. Yet on stage 2, when babies start speaking for the very first time, they all start speaking universally shared sounds. And then they go into locally understood sounds. So I wonder if there's a universally shared prosody too. So that might be another stage. So you start universally shared prosody, then locally used prosody, then universally shared sounds, and locally used sounds. And this makes a lot of sense. The logic behind this universal then local thing is we all start out completely blank slates, whiteness, just completely blank white minds. So we all start out as world citizens, but then in order to belong, since the purpose of language is to figure out where you belong somewhere. So in order to belong somewhere, you got to communicate with the people that you're physically with. We then focus on the local. So we start out universal because any baby could potentially be born anywhere in the entire world. Therefore, the brain has to come equipped with the ability to just start out anywhere and then focus locally. So there's that has been demonstrated with the sound, but it has not been demonstrated yet with the prosody. But babies are born recognizing the prosody of their native language. That has been proven. There's been research showing. Again, I read this, so I'm just taking it for granted as true. 5-day-old babies, when they're sucking, there's the study was there was something attached to the bamboo, the sucker, this thing, and when they sucked, it would play a tape recorder, and the tape recorder had the mother speaking, or it had some foreigner speaking. No. What was it? So that's weird, because I gotta go back to that. I gotta read the specifics better. but the tape recorder had someone speaking in their, oh yeah, it was not the mother, it was someone speaking in the native language, and there was someone speaking in a foreign language, and whenever the person speaking in the native language played, they would suck more fervently, and then whenever someone speaking in the foreign language played, they wouldn't react to it. So it was just noise. So they recognized at least the prosody of the native language, even at 5 days old. And then they would suck even more, and then they would suck even more fervently if it was the mother speaking versus another native but not their mother. So that shows a relationship that they develop with the mother from within the womb. So what I have to do now is I have to really work on defining these stages, giving a value to them that can then be generalized to adults. Prosody being developing an emotional relationship with the language, then training one's brain to recognize the unique sounds of the target language. So first training one's brain to recognize the emotion, to be comfortable with the emotion of the target language, then training one's brain to recognize and be comfortable with the sounds of the target language, and then training one's brain to be comfortable with the grammar of the target language. So, yeah. Okay. Emotion, first it's emotion, then it's sound, individual sounds, and then it's combining them. What's weird is when the babies start on stage 4 and 5, when they start speaking in words, meaning that it's the very first time that they actually speak in anything meaningful to adults. So I guess a semantic relationship with language. They're already using correct grammar, though they don't vocally express it. Another study done on babies in these two stages showed that when the researcher recorded everything that a baby said from the beginning to the end of an utterance. So although it was only speaking in 1 or 2 or 3 word utterances, it recorded everything from so not just from the 2 to 3 word utterance, but from the moment it spoke to it was done till that thought was over. And although what was coming out of the baby's mouth were just parses of 1 to 3 word utterances, when combined it was all grammatical. So it was as if in the baby's mind there was a grammatically coherent sentence, but the production of that sentence was being bottlenecked by the baby's mouth, meaning the baby couldn't say all the necessary words to express grammatical coherence, but it existed in the mind already. Which obviously, so there's definitely something going on underlying this in all these stages where the grammar is being acquired before they even start combining sounds into semantically coherent words. Now, how do I gotta take that into consideration too, because it would be pointless to develop a program that just had the adults get familiar with the emotion, then the sound, and then the grammar, if what's happening with babies is they're already familiar with the grammar mentally before they start speaking words. So the order is not just emotion, sound, grammar. It's emotion, sound, words, but grammar's happening the entire time. I gotta think about that. Ugh, done. Finally, I'm done.